and I'll pass it to Debbie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Debbie Chen. I'm an assistant professor in the architecture department and also the graduate program director. I look forward to fielding your questions and getting to know you a little bit. And I'll throw it over to John.
Hello everyone, my name is Can Altay. I'm an associate professor of interior architecture and the graduate program director there. And I guess we'll have a more chance to talk about the departments, programs, and the tracks.
So for this audience, it's a smaller audience because we're really just super focused on these architecture programs. That's why we're here. So I do think it would be beneficial for our GPDs as students sort of thinking about, well, what questions should I ask? I don't know what I don't know. Why don't we start, Suzanne, in the same order? A little bit about the department, the programs or tracks that it offers, any qualifications, just a little bit about the program and really what is the thing that sets us apart from other programs, being in the School of Art and Design, of course, being one of them, in that vein though.
Sure. Okay, so the Landscape Architecture Department is a graduate-only program at RISD, one of the few. We host two programs. We host a traditional 3-year MLA, and that is typically for students who are coming in with a background in something other than design, or students who are coming with a 4-year degree in architecture or landscape architecture. And then we also host an advanced placement 2-year degree, which is for students who have a 5-year BLA or BArch. And it's a professionally accredited program. I won't get into the specifics of the curriculum, but I think what sets us apart from other landscape programs in the country is that I believe we are the only accredited program in an art design school. And so we really prioritize making and working by hand and combining different experimental processes that we both develop in the department, but also see our students bring in and what they're learning from other fine arts and design departments into your sort of approaches to landscape architecture. So I think we're in a moment in time where, because of the changes in climate, we're increasingly having to deal with contexts that are constantly changing. And so really being able to approach it with these new tools, I think is unique to landscape at RISD. I guess Debbie, you're up next.
Debbie, you're up.
Great. Yeah. I'm happy to introduce a little bit of the architecture department. We have 2 tracks, a 3-year Master of Architecture track, and then a 2-year advanced standing track as well. Both of our tracks are professional degrees. So you're coming in pre-professional. So it's important to state that if you are already obtaining a 5-year BArch, our master's is not for you, actually. It's not a post-professional program. That being said, though, like Suzanne was describing the landscape architecture department, our department also gets to benefit from, I think, the uniqueness of being in an art and design school. I think we're one of the few architecture programs that has this context. And what is really exciting about the way that we think about architecture at RISD is that we're trying to engage with larger contextual issues of environment, climate, but also kind of material ecologies. And we get to engage in those conversations with our kind of cross-disciplinary friends in other departments, but we're also experimenting with these questions through a process that is really aligned with making things and making drawings, making kind of artifacts, and making books even. So it's a very creatively guided process in the way that we kind of interrogate these larger environmental questions framed through architecture generally. And John.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello again, everyone. And at Interior Architecture Department, we offer effectively 3 programs. One of them is the Master of Arts, the MA, on adaptive reuse. And this is a 1-year plus post-professional degree. I mean, Debbie already hinted on the differences. So this program really is for applicants with a solid academic and professional background in architecture or one of the related fields. Whereas the other 2 programs are the Masters of Design in Interior Studies with 2 tracks. One is again on adaptive reuse, and the second one is on exhibition and narrative environments. And you may ask why these 2 tracks and what do they refer to? I mean, interior architecture is ultimately about how we can transform the existing built environment and also how we experience the spaces that we inhabit. And the adaptive reuse program really focuses on reimagining new possible futures for the existing built environment, the existing buildings, the existing urban fabric, from small scale to large scale, really thinking about structurally, but also socially, paying a great deal of attention to the future of our built environment. And with that, it kind of connects really into a common ground with which both Suzanne and Debbie mentioned is the environment and the climate change, and we could kind of also phrase it as sustainability and thinking about how we can rework and reconfigure the existing environment, built environment, so that it's kind of results in a more meaningful future, basically, for these already existing buildings instead of demolishing them. Meanwhile, the exhibition and narrative environments program focuses more on the experiential side, more on the experience of the spaces and on telling stories and conveying ideas through designing space. And which means much more a kind of sensory, atmospheric, and at times dramatic take on spatial design and designing interiors. And also resulting often in temporary but very meaningful spaces. And they manifest themselves in mostly in exhibition form, but also narrative environments can include brand spaces. They can include environments of cultural exchange, scenographic works such as stage design and fashion runways, for example, are as example of narrative environments as well.
All right, guys. I only have one question, and this is a Q&A session. So I know you all have questions, and I have an idea of what some of them might be. So if they're not in the Q&A, I'll just go ahead and start rattling some off. But let's get to the ones that we have here first. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a 3-part question. Are most of the courses team projects individual? They're not referencing to any one department here. So let's answer that one first. Are most of the courses team projects or individual? Maybe all 3 of you can address that. Mm-hmm. Certainly at certain level, like where you are in the program, right? So whoever wants to jump in first, feel free.
I can jump in. So broadly speaking, I would say we have both individual and team projects, but especially in the beginning of the program, because we have people coming from so many backgrounds, the projects tend to be more individual. And then as we move along and the projects take on complexity, you start working in the way that you might in an office, which is in more collaborative environments and in teams, so you can take on larger issues. Travel studios, RISD has a range of travel classes in different departments that are open to all students, including in the summer. In our department specifically, we are starting to do more travel studios. So I actually just got back from Lisbon. One of my colleagues is teaching a studio in Lisbon this fall. It's an advanced studio looking at water management across the city. And so we just got back from a week there. In the spring, we have a studio that's being co-taught with architecture going to Puerto Rico. And I think next year we may have a studio going to Sweden. So I mean, I think it's true for all of the architectural disciplines, really understanding different contexts and the one that you're in and how to work with those contexts is really important. So travel is a big component of that. So in some cases, when it's part of the required curriculum, it's covered by the school. And then when it's something that you elect to take outside of the department, often that might have a fee that's attached. And then thesis is compulsory at RISD, and all of our departments, I think, approach it in different ways. Because it's compulsory, though, there's always a level of preparation that's built into your curriculum.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of a lot of the great information that Suzanne's already provided. So in architecture as well, there is, you'll be doing a lot, you'll be doing both individual and group-based work. In the beginning, just like in landscape architecture, we do tend to design more individual projects just because there's a certain degree of skill building that's involved at an individual level. However, even within Core 1 Studio, which I teach, we have moments of group work, which really is meant to foster kind of collaborative skills as well and group thinking. Certainly when you reach larger scales of complexity and even kind of territory, such as an urban project, you tend to work in groups because there is a hope that you rely on your group members for everyone's individual strengths and expertise. Travel studios, just like Suzanne said, RISD does have its own RISD Global office, which handles travel courses outside of departmental purview. Within the architecture department, we're also trying to build out more travel opportunities. Usually they happen in kind of the advanced core level or advanced studio level. Some of our previous Core 3 urban studios have gone to Sweden. They've also gone to Mexico City, and this year they'll be going somewhere within the continental United States. And our advanced studios kind of offer a range of travel depending on the area of focus. So I know just this week we had Professor Herman Payeras take his students to Martha's Vineyard because they're focusing on kind of the diaspora of migration and borders. And lastly, I mean, I think Suzanne answered the thesis question. It is mandatory, but you'll see that thesis can take many different forms here at RISD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, most of the questions were answered brilliantly. I'll just kind of want to touch on the individual versus team project, and I'm not sure where the kind of question is exactly coming from, but in interior architecture, it's also the majority of work you will be doing is individual work with a dash of, let's say, teamwork, but we really emphasize the notion of learning together. So the studio is a collective and collaborative environment. So doing individual work does not mean that you are detached from your cohort. On the contrary, that you'll be always spending time together with them and learning from each other, which is a kind of essential and a great opportunity in a place such as RISD, which brings really amazing students from all around the world and all around the States. So it's really the opportunity to learn from each other as much as learn from us. So in that sense, the collaborative environment and the kind of spirit of sharing is essential. And this applies to the individual thesis as well. I mean, it is a compulsory thesis in interior architecture as well, and individually worked. But even within that, we really ask our students to share their work with one another and also exchange ideas, comment on each other's thesis, ongoing thesis work. So in that sense, I think that needs emphasis. And with regards to travel studios, interior architecture also has done numerous studios abroad. Most common is like has been done almost annually, the Copenhagen studio, and many other places around the world. Again, Portugal was one. I know that Istanbul was one before my time, and many other places. But also, just a parenthesis, this like may not guarantee that there's a travel studio while you are traveling, while you are studying. But the global, like RISD-wide traveling classes and studios are, I think, always available.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot that can be done on the periphery of coursework too. Like over the summer, I know a lot of students do European grad studies programs in Europe, and things of that nature. So now we have 23 questions. So we're just
Wow,
we're just gonna keep going. It's funny. It's like once you start the discussions, like the kind of the wheels start turning, you're like, oh my God, I have so many questions. And I just want to remind everybody to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. Sometimes they get lost in the chat because we're putting a bunch of links in there. I did link to the 2024 thesis publications. You guys can see the different types of work that was being made in thesis this past spring. So next question. Jen, you probably have a better pulse on all the questions that are being asking, but I just don't want to repeat a bunch of questions. We're going to try to get to the ones that haven't talked about yet.
So I think this is a good one. The next question is specific for architecture, but I think everybody, all three of you can answer this question more broadly. And I think it's a great way to like really kick off our portfolio Q&A question. What, like, you know, I know there's not one answer for this, you know, it's not super clear, you know, clear cut. But if there's one thing that you're looking for in a successful portfolio, what is it that you're looking for?
I guess I can start and pass it along. But yeah, I think Jen's right. We'll probably have very similar responses to what I think a effective portfolio could look like. For me, it's really, I mean, you want the content of the portfolio to really shine. So it's less about overthinking or kind of designing the layout too much. I think you can err on the maybe the suggestion that like simplicity is best. So finding a simple, clear way to represent the work usually does the trick, because that way we're really able to the admissions committees can really then evaluate the work as you would like them to see it. So that's my kind of short answer of it. Simple and clear is best.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, Debbie's absolutely right. And what I'll add to simple is best is that quantity, like more isn't necessarily better. Be selective in what you show us and trust that we can interpolate between things that are very different to understand, you know, how the work represents how you see the world, how you work with your hands, and also maybe what your interests are in between there. So what I would also add is that, you know, I think in all departments are seeing a range of work from folks who might be entering design for the first time to folks who have some sort of background in design. And I think for all of those applications, showing us a range of tools that you use and ways that you engage space is really helpful. And if you do have a design background, don't feel that we only want to see the most finished, most polished work. We find that often we really also want to see some of the process work to understand how you think.
Do you want me to chip in? I think that, I mean, the answers cover quite a bit. So, and Molly mentioned there's a lot of questions. But...
Yeah, you know, I just want to go back really quick to something you said, John. The student-to-student relationships. You know, so I've been here for quite some time, and one of the things the students always tell me is why they chose RISD was because of the cohorts they're coming, because of their peers that are pushing them, that are inspiring them. And, you know, like you said, it's not always those that come from architecture backgrounds that bring the most to the table in a way. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't let that scare anybody here. That if you're not coming from that kind of a background, unless of course it's a prerequisite for like a, your post-professional program in interior architecture, and it absolutely is. Really quick nuts and bolts question. What is the size of your newly admitted cohort? And this is it changes just a little bit slightly based on space. But typically architecture, we are looking to enroll 30 every fall. This is we have a 2-year and a 3-year. For the most part, it's 3-year program. 30 is the size for the total combined. In interior architecture, anywhere between 30 to 35, again, depending on space for all 3 program tracks. And then for, I said architecture, didn't I? No, I mean landscape. And then for landscape, again, that is combining the 2-year and 3-year program, right around 18 to 20, again, depending on space. So these things vary every year just a little bit, depending on with student withdrawals and things like that. But I thought that it might be important to just understand how small our programs are in comparison to some of the other programs out there, where you might be sitting in a classroom size of about 150 students. All right, next question.
Molly, just a parenthesis, because I think if we were looking at the same question, it was Marissa's that also asking about the class size, which is slightly different because we split those cohorts into smaller groups, and I think we should address that as well. I mean, for interior architecture, mainly let's say median is 10 students per studio. It may go down to 8, sometimes up to 12, according to like how the cohort splits. But usually, at least for the moment, for example, there are 3 advanced studios, which means like 3 tutors are kind of working together with that particular cohort, around between 9 and 11 students per class. So it's really, in that sense, a close working environment. Yeah.
Yeah, and the school's ratio overall, undergrad and grad, is 9 to 1, 9 students to 1 faculty. We're a small school. That's just the facts. The next question is for landscape. And looking from a student coming from a non-design background, do you have any sense of like the percentage of students that are coming into your program that don't have a design background and those that do?
Yeah, it varies year to year, but I would say for this last couple of years, it's been about a 2 to 1 of students who don't have a design background to those who do. There are some additional questions about when those classes are joined and when they start to split apart. We actually start everyone in the same place because we find that even for students who have a background in an architectural discipline, they haven't necessarily spent a lot of time in abstract making and working by hand. And so the first year is actually designed not only to introduce those skills, but to allow for different levels of engagement with these sort of abstract questions that we're looking at in the studio. And so it's interesting because I think there's a lot of cross-learning between students who don't have a design background, bringing in different types of thinking skills to approach an abstract question, and those who do have a design background who have more foundation in spatial thinking and skills, but maybe haven't had that infiltrated by other ways in other processes. So we start together and then it starts to split in the second year.
That's great. Thank you, Suzanne. All right, let's move on.
Sorry, guys, we got some construction going on and I had to tamper the noise. Jen, what are you seeing?
All right. Oh, it just moved. Let's see here. Here's a good question. What are some components you'd like to see in post-professional portfolios? Process images, final photography, etc. I think anybody can really answer this question.
I mean, I can give it a go and feel free to add on. I think it's important to convey your experience with regards to like also your role within those projects, because in a professional environment, most often you work in teams. So it would be like crucial for us to learn about what your input was in particular to that project. And if it's a realized project, definitely photographic documentation of the realized space or building would definitely come in handy. and also any particular portions or bits of work that you yourself authored or were a significant co-author, that they would be very helpful. But I think the bottom line is indicating the context in which the work was done, the office or the professional environment in which the work was done, and your role within it to be underlined in that presentation.
Mhm.
All right, here and Suzanne or Debbie, would you like to piggyback on that question?
I'm kind of caught up on the post-professional maybe part of the question. The MArch programs are pre-professional, meaning you're applying without a professional degree. So I don't know if that.
I think the bigger question is if I'm working for a firm or a larger organization, how do I show, my work? If it's all group, work, well, you just have to explicitly call out what were your contributions while also giving credit to the larger group. And I think that is for post and professional folks. You want to follow those rules. You don't want to try to take credit for anybody else's work.
Yeah, and I saw another question down later, which I think a lot ties into this discussion, which is what's the kind of ratio of professional work versus academic work? I think it's great to see professional work, especially if you've been working in the field for several years, and you certainly do want to credit or kind of specifically define your role in these professional contexts. But with that being said, we also do want to see kind of your creative work, how you see the world, how you engage with the world, what sort of larger questions you have within the discipline that you're applying into. So I think that is an invitation for you to find a balance that properly, I think, represents you, not only as a professional, but also as someone who will be a thinker, a designer, a maker. Yeah, and that's hard to perceive if we're only getting professional work.
Right.
Molly, if I could add one thing. Sorry, I can't. Okay. So I think this also, as you mentioned, applies to people who may not have worked professionally in design because you may have been doing teamwork in your education. Just always tell us what your role is so that we understand, we work in collaborative disciplines, but really understanding your contribution becomes key to us interpreting your portfolio. But I also wanted to make the point that we're always looking at the portfolio in conjunction with your transcripts, in conjunction with your essay, in conjunction with your CV. And so we're reading every portfolio differently because we're trying to join it with who you are and what your experiences are. So if you're someone who doesn't have a background in design, we're not comparing you and evaluating you the same way we would someone who's had professional experience. I think it's important.
Yeah, and that being said, don't try to make work that you think architecture would be if that's not necessarily your specialty, right? So showing us your best work can really show us your potential. The next question here, which I think is a really, really good one, is about skill building. So in the same vein of not coming from a design background, skill building. And I want to talk about the start of each of our programs here in architecture, which start in the summer. So let's talk a little bit about those summer programs and how that prepares them to then kick off September, sometimes even ahead of the game, So can you guys talk about your summer programs and how that is there really to support students, not just students from a different design background, but all students?
Yeah, I can start off. So in architecture, for the 3-year students, we have a mandatory 6-week summer program, which usually starts beginning of July and lasts until mid-August. And those 3 weeks are divided into 3 different courses, let's say. And it's really an exciting time where everybody comes together to not only kind of learn, let's say, foundational skills within architecture, but also really kind of maybe expand their minds a little bit about certain frameworks that we're going to be using over and over again in the studio. So you're kind of starting to learn certain kind of skills of architectural drawing. We jump right into learning Rhino. It's a 3D drafting and modeling software. So if you don't know any sort of digital software, that's totally fine. This in the summers when we teach it to you. That's in kind of one course. In this another course, it's very shop intensive. So we familiarize you with all the equipment in our shop, woodworking, laser cutting, 3D printing, etc. And then lastly, the third course is kind of an intro into, let's say, design. We're introducing more abstract concepts of architecture, spatial organization. So we're starting to introduce ideas of, a way that a house could be organized or plan or section, elevation, kind of making connections between certain, let's say, disciplinary tools or frameworks and how that helps us design space or think about how space is designed.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I just want to jump in here and say that some of these departments do have specific portfolio requirements as well. So in the same line of coming from a design background or not, Suzanne, thank you for saying that you're reviewed, not being compared to like the same people. But I'm just gonna put in the link here of where you can find your specific requirements for the portfolio, if any. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. I might just quickly jump in on our summer program. So in landscape architecture, our required summer program is for all incoming students, and it's 4 weeks long. The first 2 weeks is like it's called field explorations, and it's a intensive sort of introduction to field work. So it's a lot of working outside, a lot of learning how to observe, an introduction to different drawing and recording skills, and also working in different ecological contexts. So it's sort of the field trip portion of the summer. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of like visiting nature reserves, kayaking, learning to work with plants, observing ecology, things like that. And then the second 2 weeks is more akin to what Debbie described. It's sort of an introduction to design. You start to learn skills for drawing and modeling, and then are taken through sort of an abstract spatial design exercise to sort of execute your first spatial thinking ideas. So that's it.
Yeah. And I'll just briefly mention the summer program, and if I may, connect it to one of the questions that I saw in the Q&A by Yerin, who asked about this like difference between the 1 year and 2 year, because I think they will link tightly. So our summer program is like very similar to how Debbie and Suzanne outlined it. It's an intensive study in which all, especially for the MDes programs, they all undergo it together, the same basic training, laying the groundwork, the fundamentals, and for like kind of being equipped to move on to the core classes and the design studio work. And in the first year, alongside the program-specific core courses, which the 2 tracks of adaptive reuse and exhibition and narrative environments take separately, they also have access to kind of joining elective courses, both from the department and outside, and also expanding their knowledge through those electives and also the forthcoming advanced design studios. And in the second year, you'll be focusing more on your own particular track and field, and especially as the thesis work kicks in. And this is when the 2 tracks really separate and focus on their own field, and each individual student is working on their own kind of thesis work throughout the year, again with the possibility of electives and cross-disciplinary input as they see fit their own kind of agendas and their own ambitions and their own kind of intentions. And regarding the 1 year MA, their summer program is separate because they are coming in as a post-professional degree, so they don't go through the kind of basic fundamentals that the MDes programs go through, but they have a different summer program. And since it's a 1 year plus program, like 1 year and the summer, it's really geared towards students who have been working. Most often that's the profile, and they have a shorter duration to give a break to their careers, but they want to uplift their kind of position within the field. And with that, it's much more project oriented, and they don't have the thesis component in the same manner as the 2 year MDes programs do. So if you are more interested in developing an individual profile and a kind of focus, then the 2 year program is probably better for you. And if you feel you need a longer duration to kind of go through these things, the MA is really for those of you who have been kind of who are already in a sense well versed in the fields of architecture and spatial design.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is a lot of portfolio questions. We are ending this session at 10:55, so I really want to dive into a lot of those portfolio tips and portfolio questions, and then I have one really great question to end on. So let's get into the portfolio tips. Everyone can answer this question, but it says, let's see, wait, where'd it go? Lost it. What general advice and tips on of things to include or avoid in the portfolio?
I mean, I think in some ways we covered this, but I know a few folks are joining maybe a few minutes late. And so I'll reiterate some of what Debbie said, which is simple is better. Don't spend a lot of your time on graphic design. We really want to understand the content. Show us a range of work. So if you're coming from a design background, a range of process to finish work. But if you're coming from a non-design background, a range of different ways that you engage in, the context that you're incited to work in, right? That could be anything from photography to sketching to watercolor to things that you fabricate and make for different reasons. We really just want to understand how you engage creative processes currently. I think we've talked about whether you should include professional work if you have it. It's absolutely welcome, but maybe also make sure you're also including things that are clearly your own, so we understand how you operate. And then I think a few folks have asked repeatedly, sort of from the point of view of someone who doesn't have a design background, what should we include? And it's really a matter of, like, we are used to looking at a broad range of ways to engage creative contexts. So think about how you do that, and then be willing to show us that work. Like, we really do know how to engage a broad range of tools that everyone is using to think creatively. Just think about how you want to exhibit that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to add to that as well, Suzanne mentioned earlier that we're not only reviewing your portfolio, but we're looking at it within the context of other things, especially your statements. So I think it's, for me, the aha moments come when I see connections between the work that is being shown, regardless of whatever medium it is, and I think what the statement is putting forth, right? As what you're interested in studying and pursuing in your graduate education. So that, for me, I think is that does a lot in revealing to me as a reviewer, oh, this person, they're really committed to these questions and they're already starting to work on it in the ways that they have found for themselves, right? Even without let's say, a prior education in this context, I can see the beginnings of a larger ongoing endeavor.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that is a super important
Sorry.
point. No, super important point. Your statement of purpose is sort of making your case, especially if you're coming from a different background, and understanding how you're bridging that gap, understanding why you want to pursue grad study at RISD within this program. This is your opportunity to show us how effectively you can communicate your ideas, even if your portfolio, you're showing your best work, doesn't directly relate, right? So I think the statement of purpose can be really critical for students who don't come from a a background or in the same field. Sorry, Jean, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say something very similar, like how you connect the dots is really becomes apparent in the statement of purpose. And with that, it's like I just want to echo Suzanne and Debbie, like your portfolio does not need, like, it can absolutely include works that may not seem directly related to the field when you look at it without kind of knowing eyes, but the way you think about it, the way you observe the world, the way you relate to the kind of what's happening around you, and the tools you have come to develop or use in kind of expressing that understanding or that positioning of yourself really can shine in a portfolio, and they may take forms that have at first surface nothing to do with interior architecture, for example, but we can read through and we can really connect the dots once it's combined with the statement of purpose.
I'm just typing in. So John, what are you seeing out there?
I'm going to quickly mention that
Yeah.
for some of these questions, especially the ones that are specific to our departments, I'm answering some in written form. So if you've typed in a question and you don't see us answering it out loud, it might be that we've answered it in written form. So make sure you check those.
Yeah, I'm doing the
Same.
I'm doing the same thing too. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been seeing the number trickle down, so I appreciate all of you doing that to work through these questions in the remaining time that we have. Let's see here. I've been seeing a couple of questions about like the curriculum and cross-disciplinary study. Is there something, can you touch upon that a little bit? Are there opportunities for students in each of your programs to take classes in other programs as well?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes,
That's the
and
short answer.
I mean beyond like access to classes from different fields and disciplines and different departments, there are also collaborations, and I think Suzanne might be the better person to, for example, touch upon the sustainability lab, which has been going on for 2 years, which is a collaboration between our department and landscape architecture, and they've done kind of very interesting work last year, and they are in their second year. And yeah, we are always kind of on the lookout for possibilities to collaborate as faculty as well. So I'll say absolutely.
Yeah, I would say there are, sorry, am I, okay. So it looked like it, Molly, it looked like I was highlighting your square, so I wasn't sure if I was in control. But yeah, I would say broadly speaking, cross-disciplinary work is heavily emphasized at RISD, and it happens in a number of different ways, which I think John has already mentioned. One would be coming from students in that you have elective spots that you can take across departments. And so we see a lot of students taking classes in other disciplines and then bringing those practices to bear in their architectural, landscape architecture, interior architecture, design practice. Second would be classes that I think faculty work on to form those cross-disciplinary relationships. And so sometimes that will happen in a class that's cross-listed across departments. So, you know, as an example, a faculty from landscape might work with a faculty from D+M to teach a class that sort of bridges the two disciplines and asks a question that students can bring their own expertise to, but also introduce skills that cross the two departments. And then the third would be, I think, the more formalized places where we've sort of created longstanding cross-disciplinary exploration. So the Sustainability Lab is a 5-year endeavor that is between the landscape and interior architecture department. Each year, it's a year-long exploration in the final year of your study. Each fall is looking at a different material. Last year was looking at clay, this year is looking at wood, and how it relates specifically to a New England context. So where do we find this material? How do we start to experiment with it? How do we start to push its applications so that we understand it in a more environmentally progressive way? So do we take old practices and start to manipulate them for new contexts? Do we develop new practices around these materials that are more sustainable? And then in the spring, this is engaged through the students' thesis projects where they take a specific question they've developed relative to that material and start to push it forward in their thesis. So yes, there are lots of opportunities for cross-disciplinary work.
Great, thank you,
Mhm.
Suzanne. And I just dropped a link in the chat that goes into more detail about the sustainability lab as well.
Hmm. We have one more question that we've kind of already touched upon this in the portfolio. But we find that we have to say it a few different ways, I think, because the question's being asked in a couple different ways. And the question is, are you only looking for images that reflect architectural elements? Of course, we've answered this already. But for example, can be watercolor or a painting be part of the portfolio? The kind of advice that I like to try to tell students is it relevant to what you're doing? Does it show us a skill set? And like, does it relate or does it give us any insight to your practice? But if it's from high school and you did it like for your first time ever, could you do it better now? Probably, maybe, right? So thinking about is it relevant in that way? Does anybody else want to touch on that at all? Otherwise, we can just keep going. You see anything, John, here? As I look through.
Sorry, I was typing an answer, but did I miss something? Sorry.
There are a lot of questions about interaction, John, but I'm telling them to email us at admissions@risd.edu, which I put in the chat here, and we'll connect them with you.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. Please send me an email, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I'm trying to kind of catch up with some of you in the Q&A, but yeah, it's kind of splitting the attention, so I'm doing my best, but feel free to reach out to me with any questions, please.
Yeah, and typically we ask them to just email us first so we can vet any application questions, and then
Okay.
we'll loop you into the questions that are pertinent to your program.
All
Okay.
right, then do that.
I saw a great question. I saw a great question about collaborations with the RISD Museum. I just dropped a link in the chat that talks about the resources that are available for current RISD students through the museum. There's a ton of options that you can take advantage of. There's a student gallery within the museum, the Gelman Gallery. You can take a look at that as well. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities and resources through that as well.
Yeah, and the RISD Museum is an amazing resource for our exhibitions track, and quite a significant number of our students are already working either within or in relation to the RISD Museum, and also in collaboration or in conversation with members of RISD Museum staff and curators. And also, like, there are like extracurricular opportunities such as the Dorner Prize, which I know that one of our students is working on their application. So it's a really multifaceted collaboration, and it's a great resource for the whole school, but especially our exhibitions track.
Mm-hmm. And we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to try to get some sound bites from you guys because I think it's so important. What is it or what are the characteristics of RISD and the programs that we offer here that we're talking about today that make them unique, make them stand out versus other schools?
Molly, the sound kind of was a bit parasiting, so I didn't get the question.
The question is, what are the characteristics of RISD in these 3 degrees that we're talking about today that make them unique and stand out from other programs that are offered or competitor programs?
Yeah. Anybody wants to go first?
I can jump in. I think in some ways this is how we started the session, but so I'll reiterate that I think for landscape, we are really the only accredited landscape program in an art and design school, and we fully embrace that in our curriculum. We make the program as much as possible about making and working by hand and using tools that are not central or typically central to our discipline to develop new pathways through landscape. I would say the other thing that I think is really unique is that thesis is compulsory, and as a result, we're really building in this process of framing your own question relative to the discipline early in the education, so everyone is leaving with their own position.
Yeah, to piggyback off of Suzanne's answer. I think, you know, what makes the architecture department at RISD different from the other Masters of Architecture programs is the fact that we are in an art and design school, and therefore our students are really able to be inspired by different ways of making that they might not otherwise be exposed to. So let's say the tools of architectural production or even imagining are really expanded here. And I would also offer my personal opinion that RISD, because we are in an art and a design context, I think we have a lot of freedom to maybe put a little bit of pressure on how do we define the discipline. So even though we are preparing you to be professionals in the field after you graduate, we're also trying to prepare you to question the field and to ultimately, hopefully, transform it. So we are both trying to prepare you to engage in the field, but also be critical about it. So I really encourage those of you who are interested in applying to the program to really look at the student work that is coming out of our Masters of Architecture program. It's different from other degree programs. I think within what's consistent is that you'll see an openness to questioning what is architecture, but that questioning is executed with a level of skill and competency and mastery that you can apply to regardless of what your question is.
And unfortunately, we have to jet. We have another webinar at 11, but I want to just thank you guys, faculty here, for taking the time to speak to the students. This is recorded, so if you want a recording of all the questions that were answered today, feel free to get in touch. We have tons more events. I put the link on there. Email us at admissions with questions, and we will see you at the next session. So thank you guys so much for being here today. Appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.
Bye.